Picture this: Bill Gates, tech titan and billionaire, walking down a bustling city street. Suddenly he stops. A homeless black woman catches his eye. What happens next defies expectations and challenges everything we think we know about privilege and prejudice. In a world where snap judgments often rule, Gates finds himself face to face with a reality he's never truly seen before. As their eyes meet, a conversation unfolds that will leave you questioning your own biases and wondering, what would you do in his shoes? Bill Gates strode down the bustling city street, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen of his smartphone. The cacophony of urban life faded into the background as he scrolled through emails and messages, his mind already racing with the day's agenda. This was a rare moment of exposure for the tech mogul, a brief foray outside the carefully controlled environments he typically inhabited. For Gates, comfort lay in the sleek boardrooms of tech giants and the polished stages of global conferences. There, he was the oracle of innovation, the billionaire philanthropist whose words could shape markets and influence world leaders. The street, with its unpredictable ebb and flow of humanity, was not his natural habitat. Lost in thought, Gates nearly collided with a figure on the sidewalk. He looked up, startled, his carefully constructed bubble of isolation suddenly punctured. His gaze met that of a woman, her weathered face a stark contrast to the pristine suits and polished shoes of his usual company. The realization hit him instantly. She was homeless. Gates froze, an uncomfortable tension gripping his body. The woman's eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to pierce through his carefully crafted public persona. In that moment, the vast chasm between their lives became painfully apparent. He stood there, a man whose net worth exceeded the GDP of many nations, face to face with someone who likely didn't know where her next meal would come from. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and unacknowledged realities. Gates shifted his weight, unsure of how to proceed. His discomfort was palpable, a feeling he was unaccustomed to in his meticulously managed life. From the corner of his eye, Gates saw movement. His security detail, ever vigilant, had noticed the encounter. They moved with practiced efficiency, ready to intervene and whisk their charge away from this unexpected and potentially uncomfortable situation. It was their job to maintain the bubble, to keep the messiness of the real world at bay. But something stopped Gates. Perhaps it was the woman's unwavering gaze, or a flicker of something in her eyes that spoke of a dignity undiminished by circumstance. Whatever the reason, he felt compelled to stay. With a subtle gesture, he signaled his security team to stand down. The guards hesitated, surprise evident in their usually impassive faces, but they obeyed. Taking a deep breath, Gates took a step toward the woman. He was about to step out of his comfort zone, to engage with a reality he had only ever seen through the lens of statistics and charity reports. Little did he know, this chance encounter on a busy street was about to challenge everything he thought he knew about poverty, privilege, and the human spirit. What happened next would not only shock Gates, but would also force him to confront his own preconceptions and biases. The conversation that followed would prove to be a profound lesson in humility, empathy, and the complex nature of societal inequality. As Gates cleared his throat, searching for words, he was about to discover that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unlikely teachers. What would this encounter reveal about the true face of homelessness in America? "Good morning," Gates managed, his voice betraying his uncertainty. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but how are you doing today?" The question felt painfully inadequate as soon as it left his lips. The woman's eyes met his, a flicker of amusement passing through them. "I'm as well as can be expected, Mr. Gates," she replied, her voice clear and confident. "Though I suspect my definition of well might differ from yours." Gates blinked, taken aback by her directness and the fact that she recognized him. He fumbled for a follow-up question, falling back on the generic inquiries he often used in carefully staged charity events. "Have you been in this situation long?" "This situation, as you put it, has been my reality for the past 18 months, she answered, her articulation precise and her tone measured. "But I assure you, it's not for lack of effort or education." Gates found himself leaning in, intrigued. The woman's poise and vocabulary challenged every preconception he held about homelessness. He realized, with a jolt of shame, how little he truly understood about the lives of those he claimed to help through his philanthropic efforts. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply," Gates began, but the woman waved off his apology. "No need to apologize, Mr. Gates. Assumptions are human nature. It's what we do with them that matters." She paused, studying his face. "Tell me, what do you think led me here?" Gates hesitated, aware of the weight of his words. I'm not sure. Job loss? Health issues?" He was acutely aware of how superficial his knowledge was, despite the millions his foundation had poured into homelessness initiatives. The woman nodded, a wry smile playing at her lips. "Those are factors, certainly. But let me ask you this. What would you say if I told you that less than 2 years ago, I was leading a team of software engineers at a tech startup?" Gates felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He stared at the woman, trying to reconcile her current circumstances with the career she described. "You're a software engineer?" he asked, unable to mask his surprise. "Was," she corrected gently. "I was a software engineer. Now I'm a statistic, a cautionary tale of how quickly one can fall through the cracks of our society." As the woman began to share her story, Gates found himself captivated. Her journey from a promising career in tech to life on the streets challenged everything he thought he knew about homelessness and economic stability. He listened intently, his mind racing with questions and a growing sense of unease about his own assumptions. The busy street faded into the background as Gates immersed himself in her narrative, realizing that this chance encounter was about to reshape his understanding of poverty, resilience, and the fragility of the American dream. Gates struggled to reconcile the woman's past with her current situation. Her articulate speech and technical knowledge stood in stark contrast to her weathered appearance and makeshift belongings. He leaned in, his curiosity overshadowing his initial discomfort. "How did you end up here?" Gates asked, his voice a mix of concern and genuine interest. "What happened between leading a team of engineers and—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at their surroundings. The woman's eyes clouded with a mix of emotions, frustration, sadness, and a hint of defiance. "It wasn't one big thing, Mr. Gates. It was a series of events, each one chipping away at my stability until there was nothing left to stand on." She spoke of a sudden layoff when her startup failed, followed by a devastating cancer diagnosis. "I had savings," she explained, "but they evaporated quickly between treatments and trying to keep a roof over my head. Before I knew it, I was drowning in medical debt." Gates listened intently, his mind racing. He had always viewed homelessness as a problem of personal choices or lack of education. But here was a highly skilled professional, someone who had done everything right, yet still found herself on the streets. "I tried to get back on my feet," the woman continued. "But do you know how hard it is to land a job when you have a gap in your resume and no permanent address? The system that I thought would catch me when I fell, it had more holes than I ever realized." As she spoke, Gates felt a growing unease. He thought of the safety nets he had always taken for granted: family wealth, connections, the ability to weather any financial storm. How different would his life have been without those buffers? "The most difficult part," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper, "was realizing how quickly society forgets you. One day you're a productive member of the workforce. The next you're invisible. People look right through you." Gates found himself confronting his own biases. He had always believed in the power of personal responsibility, that hard work and smart choices were enough to ensure success. But the woman's story painted a different picture, one where circumstances beyond one's control could derail even the most promising life. "What about government assistance?" Gates asked, grasping for solutions. "Surely there are programs." The woman's laugh was tinged with bitterness. "The wait lists are long, Mr. Gates, and the bureaucracy. It's a full-time job just trying to navigate the system. By the time help arrives, if it ever does, you're often too far gone." As Gates listened, he felt a profound shift in his perspective. The problem wasn't just about individual choices or lack of effort. It was about a system with gaping holes where even the most prepared could fall through. "I never thought it could happen to me," the woman said, echoing Gates's own thoughts. I suspect most people don't. But the line between security and homelessness is thinner than anyone wants to believe. Gates nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling over him. As he sat there on the bustling sidewalk, surrounded by the trappings of a thriving city, he felt a growing unease about his own privilege and the vast gulf that separated his reality from hers. Gates leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "With all you've been through," he asked, his voice low, "how do you keep going?" The woman's eyes met his, a glimmer of something unexpected shining through. Her response would shatter Gates' preconceptions about strength, ingenuity, and the human spirit. "Survival demands creativity, Mr. Gates," she began, her voice steady. "Every day presents a new puzzle to solve, a challenge that would stump even your brightest engineers." She described her daily routine with a mix of pride and resignation, finding safe places to sleep, accessing public restrooms for basic hygiene, and locating free Wi-Fi hotspots to search for job opportunities. Each task required careful planning and resourcefulness. Gates listened, fascinated by the ingenuity behind her strategies. She spoke of using public libraries not just for shelter, but as impromptu offices for job applications. She detailed her network of contacts among local businesses, where she could occasionally find odd jobs or a warm meal. "Your problem-solving skills are remarkable," Gates admitted, a note of admiration creeping into his voice. "It's not unlike the innovation we strive for in the tech world." The woman nodded, a wry smile playing at her lips. "Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. But I'm not alone in this. There's a whole community out here, supporting each other." She spoke of an underground network of homeless individuals who shared information about safe sleeping spots, upcoming job fairs, and which shelters had open beds. Gates was struck by the complexity of this hidden ecosystem, a testament to human resilience and cooperation. "But how do you maintain hope?" Gates pressed, genuinely curious. "In the face of such adversity, what keeps you going?" The woman's expression softened, her eyes distant. "Hope comes in small doses out here. It's in the kindness of a stranger who offers a warm meal. It's in the small victories, like finding a place to shower or landing a day's work." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "But what truly sustains me is the ability to give back, even in my circumstances." Gates leaned in, intrigued. The woman continued, her voice gaining strength. "3 times a week, I volunteer at the shelter where I sometimes stay. I help with their computer systems, teach basic coding to other residents, and assist with job applications." The revelation hit Gates like a thunderbolt. Here was a woman who, despite her own dire circumstances, was actively working to uplift others. It was a level of altruism that challenged his understanding of human nature. "That's incredible," Gates breathed, struggling to find the right words. "Your resilience, your commitment to others, it's truly inspiring." The woman shrugged, a hint of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "It's not about inspiration, Mr. Gates. It's about community. We're all in this together, and sometimes helping others is the best way to help yourself." As Gates absorbed her words, he felt a profound shift in his perspective. The woman before him wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She was a testament to the indomitable human spirit, a beacon of hope in the most unlikely of places. His admiration grew, mixed with a dawning realization of how much he still had to learn about the true nature of resilience and community. Gates had always prided himself on his work ethic and ingenuity, but as he listened to the woman's story, a startling realization began to take shape. Could it be that the greatest advantage he'd had in life was one he'd never even recognized? The bustling street faded into the background as Gates found himself lost in thought. He recalled his early days at Microsoft, the long nights coding in his garage, the thrill of building something from scratch. "You know," he began, his voice tinged with nostalgia, "I remember when Paul Allen and I were just starting out. We worked around the clock, barely sleeping, living on pizza and coffee." The woman nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. "I'm sure you did, Mr. Gates. But tell me, where were you living during those long nights of coding?" Gates paused, caught off guard by the question. "Well, I was staying with my parents," he admitted. "They were supportive of my work, even though they didn't always understand it." And if your venture had failed? The woman pressed gently. What would have happened to you? The weight of her words settled on Gates like a heavy blanket. He realized, perhaps for the first time, the vast safety net that had always been beneath him. I suppose I would have gone back to Harvard, he said slowly, or found another opportunity in the tech world. The woman's eyes held no judgment, only a quiet understanding. Mr. Gates, I don't say this to diminish your achievements. Your hard work and innovation have changed the world. But it's important to recognize that not everyone starts from the same place. Gates nodded, feeling a mixture of discomfort and gratitude for this unexpected lesson. He thought about his childhood, the private school education, the access to computers at a time when they were rare and expensive. Each of these advantages had seemed normal to him, but now he saw them through new eyes. You're right, he said softly. I've always believed that success comes from hard work and determination, but I'm realizing that's only part of the story. The woman smiled, a hint of approval in her expression. Recognizing privilege is the first step towards using it responsibly, she said. Think about it. How many brilliant minds are out there, capable of revolutionizing technology or solving global problems, but lacking the resources to even begin? Gates felt a shift in his perspective, as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes. He thought about the countless initiatives his foundation had launched, always operating under the assumption that opportunity was equally accessible to all. But what if the very systems designed to create opportunity were inherently biased? As the conversation deepened, Gates felt his worldview expanding. He saw now that his success, while earned through hard work, had also been buoyed by a series of advantages he'd never fully acknowledged. The woman's words echoed in his mind, challenging him to reconsider his approach to philanthropy and social change. Thank you, Gates said, his voice thick with emotion. You've given me a lot to think about. I wonder how many other blind spots I might have when it comes to understanding the challenges people face. The woman's eyes softened. We all have blind spots, Mr. Gates. The important thing is to keep our minds open and be willing to learn from every experience, even unexpected ones on a city street. Just as Gates thought he had learned his most valuable lesson of the day, the conversation shifted, revealing a depth of knowledge he never expected to find on these streets. Could this chance encounter reshape the future of technological innovation? You mentioned you were a software engineer, Gates said, his curiosity piqued. What area did you specialize in? The woman's eyes lit up, a spark of passion igniting in her weathered face. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, she replied, her voice taking on a new energy. I was working on developing more efficient algorithms for natural language processing. Gates leaned in, intrigued. That's fascinating. We're doing similar work at Microsoft. What do you think about the recent advancements in transformer models? For the next few minutes, Gates found himself engrossed in a technical discussion he'd never anticipated having on a city sidewalk. The woman's knowledge was not just current but insightful, offering perspectives Gates hadn't considered. The problem with many of these models, she explained, her hands moving animatedly, is that they're trained on data sets that don't reflect the full spectrum of human experience. They're inherently biased towards the experiences of those with consistent internet access and the luxury of time to interact with AI systems. Gates nodded, absorbing her words. He'd heard similar critiques before, but never from someone who had lived on both sides of the digital divide. What would you suggest as a solution? He asked, genuinely curious. The woman paused, considering. We need to actively seek out diverse voices in AI development, not just in terms of race or gender, but socioeconomic status too. The perspectives of those who've experienced homelessness, poverty, or life in developing nations. These are crucial if we want AI to truly serve all of humanity. Gates felt a shift in his thinking. He'd always believed in the power of technology to solve global problems, but he'd never considered how the very process of developing that technology might be flawed. You know, he said slowly, I think you're on to something important here. We've been so focused on advancing the technology that we may have overlooked the importance of who's guiding that advancement. The woman nodded, a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. Exactly. Imagine the innovations we could see if tech companies actively sought out and supported talent from all walks of life, not just those who've had the privilege of traditional education and stable living situations. As their conversation continued, Gates found himself mentally reassessing his approach to talent acquisition and development. He thought about the countless brilliant minds that might be going to waste, hidden in shelters or on street corners, their potential untapped. "I have to ask," Gates said, his voice tinged with a mix of admiration and regret, "why haven't you reached out to tech companies? With your knowledge and experience, surely there would be opportunities." The woman's smile turned wry. "Mr. Gates, when you're homeless, just finding a place to charge your phone is a challenge. Keeping up with LinkedIn connections and industry trends? Nearly impossible. And that's assuming companies would look past the gap in my resume and my current living situation." Gates felt the weight of her words. He realized that the tech industry, for all its talk of disruption and innovation, was often bound by the same biases and limitations as any other sector. As their conversation drew to a close, Gates knew that this unexpected encounter had the potential to reshape not just his approach to philanthropy, but to the very way his company sought out and nurtured talent. The untapped potential in marginalized communities was not just a social issue, it was a missed opportunity for groundbreaking innovation. As Gates pondered the untapped potential in marginalized communities, he couldn't help but wonder, what invisible barriers were keeping brilliant minds like hers from re-entering the workforce? The answer would challenge everything he thought he knew about equal opportunity. "Have you tried applying for jobs in the tech sector?" Gates asked, his voice tinged with curiosity and concern. The woman's eyes clouded over, a mix of frustration and resignation etching lines into her face. "I've lost count of the applications I've sent out," she replied, her voice low. "But it's not just about qualifications anymore. It's about having an address to put on those applications." Gates furrowed his brow, the implications of her words slowly sinking in. "You mean?" "I mean that the moment a potential employer realizes I'm homeless, my resume might as well be blank," she explained. "It's a cruel irony. I need a job to afford housing, but I need housing to get a job." The billionaire felt a wave of discomfort wash over him. He'd always believed in the power of merit, that skills and determination were the great equalizers. But here was a stark reminder of the systemic barriers that could render even the most qualified candidates invisible. "Surely there must be companies willing to look past that," Gates insisted, his mind racing through potential solutions. The woman shook her head slowly. "It's not just about willingness, Mr. Gates. It's about unconscious bias, about the assumptions people make when they hear homeless. Even if I make it to an interview, how do I explain the gap in my employment history? How do I assure them I'm reliable when I don't know where I'll be sleeping that night?" Gates listened intently, his worldview shifting with each word. He thought of the hiring processes at his own company, wondering how many potential innovators they might have overlooked due to circumstances beyond their control. "Did you know," the woman continued, her voice taking on an educational tone, "that nearly half of homeless individuals report being denied a job because they lack a permanent address? It's a statistic that becomes all too real when you're living it." Gates felt a pang of shame. Despite his foundation's work on homelessness, he'd never truly grasped the catch-22 faced by those trying to escape it. The woman's words painted a vivid picture of a system designed to keep people out, rather than lift them up. "What about legal protections?" Gates asked, grasping for solutions. "Surely there must be laws against this kind of discrimination?" The woman's laugh was tinged with bitterness. "Legal protections for the homeless are minimal at best. We're often at the mercy of individual employers' biases, with little recourse when those biases shut us out." As Gates absorbed this information, he felt a fundamental shift in his understanding of homelessness and employment. The narrative of pulling oneself up by the bootstraps that he'd long believed in suddenly seemed woefully inadequate in the face of such systemic obstacles. "I had no idea," Gates admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've always thought that talent and hard work were enough, but sometimes the deck is stacked against you before you even get a chance to play your hand," the woman finished for him. Gates nodded slowly, the weight of this realization settling on his shoulders. He thought of his foundation's approach to philanthropy, focused on providing resources and opportunities. But what good were opportunities if the very systems meant to facilitate them were fundamentally flawed? As their conversation continued, Gates found himself reevaluating not just his personal beliefs, but the entire framework of his philanthropic efforts. The woman's insights were forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, systemic barriers, and the limits of individual effort in the face of societal obstacles. The concrete jungle surrounding them seemed to shift and morph as Gates processed this new information. "I've walked these streets 1,000 times," he mused, "but I've never truly seen them." The woman's next words would open his eyes to a city designed to exclude, hidden in plain sight. "Let's take a walk," the woman suggested, her eyes scanning the bustling sidewalk. Gates nodded, falling into step beside her. As they moved through the city, she began to point out features he'd never noticed before. "See those benches?" she said, gesturing to a nearby bus stop. "Notice the armrests? They're not for comfort. They're there to prevent people from lying down." Gates peered closer, realizing she was right. The benches, which he'd passed countless times without a second thought, now looked cold and unwelcoming. As they continued, the woman highlighted other elements of the urban landscape. Spikes on ledges, sloped windowsills, and even the design of public spaces all took on new meaning. "It's called hostile architecture," she explained, her voice tinged with resignation, "designed to deter homeless individuals from using public spaces." Gates felt a growing sense of unease as he began to see the city through her eyes. The urban environment, which he had always viewed as a symbol of progress and opportunity, now revealed a darker side. It was a landscape peppered with invisible barriers, designed to push certain members of society to the margins. "I had no idea," Gates admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "How widespread is this?" The woman's laugh was tinged with bitterness. "It's everywhere once you know what to look for. San Francisco, New York, right here in Seattle, cities across the country are implementing these designs." As they walked, she shared more about the daily challenges of life without a home. Finding a place to rest, to clean up, even to use the bathroom. Tasks Gates had always taken for granted became complex puzzles to solve. "And it's not just the physical barriers," she continued. "Policies and social stigma create invisible walls just as effective as any spike or bench design." Gates listened intently, his mind racing. He thought about the millions his foundation had poured into homelessness initiatives. How much of that effort had been undermined by these systemic barriers he'd never even considered? "You know," the woman said, pausing their walk, "a recent study found that 60% of philanthropic efforts don't involve input from homeless individuals. Without our voices, solutions remain superficial." The weight of her words settled on Gates. He realized that despite his best intentions, his approach to urban poverty had been fundamentally flawed. How could he hope to create lasting change without understanding the daily realities of those he aimed to help? As they stood there, surrounded by the buzz of city life, Gates felt a profound shift in his perspective. He saw now that addressing homelessness wasn't just about providing resources or temporary shelters. It required a complete reimagining of urban spaces and policies. "I think," Gates said slowly, his voice filled with determination, "it's time for my foundation to reassess our urban initiatives. We need to involve voices like yours from the very beginning." The woman nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. As they prepared to part ways, Gates knew that this chance encounter would have far-reaching implications. It wasn't just about changing his personal views, it was about leveraging his influence to challenge the very systems that perpetuated inequality in urban spaces. The city bustled around them, but for Gates, time seemed to stand still. He'd spent billions on philanthropy, but had he ever really connected with those he aimed to help? As he faced the woman who had opened his eyes, Gates realized the most valuable exchange was yet to come. "After everything we've discussed," Gates began, his voice quiet but intent, "what do you think could truly make a difference? What's the key to addressing these complex issues?" The woman paused, her eyes scanning the urban landscape they had just traversed together. Her answer, when it came, was disarmingly simple yet profound. "Connection, Mr. Gates. Real human connection. Gates blinked, taken aback by the simplicity of her response. He had expected a complex policy proposal or an innovative technological solution. Instead, she offered something far more fundamental. "Think about it," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "When was the last time you had a conversation like this with someone experiencing homelessness? Not through a charity event or a carefully staged meeting, but a genuine, spontaneous exchange?" Gates felt a twinge of discomfort as he realized the truth in her words. Despite his years of philanthropic work, he had rarely engaged directly with those his initiatives aimed to help. "True change," the woman explained, "starts with understanding, not just intellectually, but emotionally. It's about seeing the humanity in each person, regardless of their circumstances." As Gates absorbed her words, he felt a shift in his perspective. He thought about the complex algorithms and data-driven approaches his foundation had relied on. While valuable, they suddenly seemed incomplete without this crucial human element. Studies show that meaningful interpersonal connections can significantly reduce feelings of isolation and improve mental health, particularly for marginalized individuals, the woman continued, her tone professorial. When people from different socioeconomic backgrounds engage in direct conversations, it fosters empathy and understanding, which can lead to community-driven solutions. Gates nodded slowly, his mind racing with the implications. He thought about the potential impact of incorporating this approach into his foundation's work. What if they prioritized direct engagement alongside their data-driven methods? "You're right," Gates admitted, his voice tinged with a mix of admiration and regret. "We've been so focused on large-scale solutions that we've overlooked the power of individual connections." The woman smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Empathy plays a crucial role in philanthropy and social change. When philanthropists engage directly with affected communities, they're more likely to develop initiatives that genuinely address the needs of those communities, rather than imposing top-down solutions." As they stood there, surrounded by the bustle of city life, Gates felt a profound sense of connection with this woman he had met by chance. Her wisdom, born from lived experience, had shaken the foundations of his approach to philanthropy. "Thank you," Gates said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me a lot to think about. I believe this conversation will change the way we approach our work." The woman nodded, her expression a mix of satisfaction and cautious optimism. "Remember, Mr. Gates, successful initiatives often arise from direct engagement with affected populations. It's about listening to our stories and experiences. This approach not only empowers individuals, but also creates a sense of ownership over the solutions being implemented." As they prepared to part ways, Gates knew that this chance encounter would have far-reaching implications. It wasn't just about changing his personal views. It was about leveraging his influence to foster a culture of genuine connection and empathy in the world of philanthropy and social change. Gates reached for his phone, his fingers trembling slightly. The woman watched him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension as he dialed a number. His security team tensed, unsure of what their charge was about to do. "Sarah, it's Bill," he said into the phone, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "I need you to set up an emergency meeting with the Homelessness Initiative team and contact the local shelters. We're going to need their input." He paused, listening to the response. "Yes, today. It's important." As Gates ended the call, he turned to the woman. "I want to help," he said, his eyes earnest. "Not just you, but everyone in your situation. We've been approaching this all wrong, and it's time for a change." The woman's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Gates, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not looking for a handout. My story isn't unique. There are thousands like me out there." Gates nodded, understanding her hesitation. "You're right, and that's exactly why I need your help. I'm not offering charity. I'm proposing a partnership." He outlined his idea, a collaborative approach to addressing homelessness that would bring together tech innovators, social workers, and most importantly, individuals with lived experience of homelessness. The woman listened intently, her initial skepticism slowly giving way to cautious interest. "We've been relying too heavily on data and not enough on real human experiences," Gates explained. "I want to create a platform that connects people like yourself with resources, job opportunities, and support networks. But we need your insights to make it work." As they discussed the potential of technology and social services, Gates felt a growing sense of excitement. He envisioned an app that could help homeless individuals locate safe sleeping spots, access mental health resources, and connect with potential employers. The woman offered valuable input, pointing out potential pitfalls and suggesting features that would address real-world challenges. This could revolutionize how we approach homelessness, Gates mused, his mind racing with possibilities. But it's only the beginning. We need to address the systemic issues as well. The hostile architecture, the discriminatory hiring practices, the lack of affordable housing. The woman nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. It's a start, she agreed. But remember, technology alone won't solve this. It needs to be paired with policy changes and a shift in societal attitudes. Gates felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt truly energized by a new project. This chance encounter had the potential to reshape his entire approach to philanthropy and social change. "I'd like you to consult on this initiative," Gates said, his voice filled with determination. "Your perspective is invaluable. Will you help us?" The woman paused, considering the offer. Finally, she nodded. "On one condition," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't just about me. We need to involve a diverse group of individuals who have experienced homelessness. Their voices need to be heard too." Gates agreed without hesitation. As they exchanged contact information, he realized that this was just the beginning. The implications of this encounter would ripple through his foundation, challenging long-held assumptions and opening new avenues for meaningful change. As they parted ways, Gates knew that his work was cut out for him. But for the first time in a long while, he felt truly connected to the mission of his philanthropy. This unexpected meeting on a city street had become a catalyst for change, not just in his approach to homelessness, but in his understanding of what it truly means to make a difference in the world. As the sun dipped below the city skyline, Gates stood at the corner where his unexpected encounter had begun. The bustling street now seemed different, alive with untold stories and hidden potential. He reflected on the profound shift in his perspective, realizing that true change often comes from the most unlikely sources. The woman's words echoed in his mind, a reminder of the power of genuine human connection. Gates understood now that his billions couldn't replace the value of a single, honest conversation. He thought of the tech moguls and policymakers in his circle, wondering how their views might change if they stepped out of their comfort zones and engaged with those they aimed to help. As he turned to leave, Gates felt a renewed sense of purpose. This chance meeting had sparked a transformation, not just in his approach to philanthropy, but in his understanding of humanity itself. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, filled with systemic barriers and ingrained biases. But for the first time in years, he felt truly connected to the mission of making a difference. Gates hoped that others would follow suit, stepping out of their bubbles to engage with diverse perspectives. Only through such connections could society hope to address its deepest issues. As he walked away, Gates silently vowed to use his influence to foster a culture of empathy and understanding, one conversation at a time.